If you have ever watched the show Moonshiners, then you certainly know the fame and the corresponding backstory of local moonshine legend Eric Digger Maines. Maines grew up in Newport, digging into moonshining at a young age. The fascination eventually paired Maines with the late Marvin Popcorn Sutton before his partnership with Mark Ramsey launched the pair to stardom via a 2011 episode of the Discovery Channel show Moonshiners. That has since brought the friends into two more different shows, Master Distiller and True Crime and Shine. But for anyone who has not met Digger and Mark, to know the people they are beyond the beloved shows, their backwoods stills, and even the back alley store that Maines is working to rebuild from flood damage in downtown Newport. Well, that requires a conversation with the one and only Mike Proffitt. Proffitt has traveled across the country, as we have recounted in numerous pieces before this one. In a multitude of stops, passers-by have questioned him about Maines and Ramsey. And Proffitt, ever one to whip out his phone and provide a connection, is happy to oblige. No matter where I am, people have asked about that, Proffitt said with a chuckle on a recent visit. I'll call them, and they're always as kind as they can be. He has watched as Maines has grown from an intrigued teenager to a 60-year-old with a routine so packed that Maines spent a Tuesday afternoon shifting from calls with executive producers to one with the local newspaper. Within that call, Maines recounted not only his background and his appreciation for Proffitt, but a few well-spun tales that the two have gone through as well. But to reach the nitty-gritty of their friendship, one must first know how Maines came to earn his nickname, Digger. As a child, Maines would do his homework on the floor of the funeral home his father, Charlie Maines. One day, a man named L.S. McKay was leaving the building and said, "See you, Eric." But before McKay finished his walk to the parking lot, he wheeled around, came back in, and told Maines that he did not like the name Eric and he should be called something different. Maines retorted by saying that it was the name his mother gave him, so he was fine with it. So McKay brought up Digger Phelps, whose father had also been a local undertaker. And if that nickname is good enough for him, then it's good enough for you, McKay said. As Maines grew, he had plenty of encounters with Proffitt, who served as Maines' teacher and coach on the football field. Well before he became famous, Maines played guard under Proffitt in the early 1980s. At the time, "We think someone is being mean to us," Maines recounted. He was notorious for telling someone they believed in them, and that's why he would come up and talk to you. He was the same person on the practice field and the game field. No nonsense, not veering off. Aside from sitting in Proffitt's class during the week and working with him on the football field, Maines has attended the same church as Proffitt for quite some time. That helped develop their bond, which has since led to plenty of camping trips. Mike was always good for anybody having their dogs on a camping trip. After he pitched a trip, I remember him trying to call those dogs to lay on him. Of course, those dogs stayed with their owners, and he had to figure out why we brought dogs with us. Every January, they would take a trip to Boomer Den Road to camp. While there, Maines and a few others would bring their dogs to deal with the cold temperatures. Mike was always complaining about anybody having their dogs on a camping trip, said Maines. One night, after he pitched a fit, I remember him trying to call those dogs to come sit on him to keep him warm. Of course, those dogs stayed with their owners, and he had to figure out the hard way why we brought dogs with us. Beyond that, Proffitt always credited Ramsey for letting him eat out of a pot when he had not been allowed to do so as a child. He can defend himself or no, but he always showed up for the food, added Maines with a laugh. He's been a huge proponent of nourishment. For his part, Proffitt credited Ramsey for giving him first dibs at the food. More than that, though, he emphasized what good ambassadors Maines and Ramsey have been for Cook County, and Maines offered equal praise in return. He was always helping everybody else, Maines said of Proffitt. And now, if there's anyone Mike has helped, I think it's time they step up and reach out to him too. Proffitt's Pondering, Moonshiners and Maury in the remote, misty hollows of the Appalachian Mountains, where time moves like a slow river and the hills are wrapped in secrets. One man's musings echoed through the ridges, trails, and valleys. That man was Proffitt, a local character known as much for his deep philosophical thoughts as for his rough-hewn wisdom. His ponderings, spoken with a voice that carried the weight of history and the quiet resilience of his people, often found their way to the sat with a well-worn rocking chair, a chew of tobacco, and a mind full of stories. On a crisp autumn evening, as the full moon hung like a lantern in the velvet sky, Proffitt found himself in one of his more reflective moods. He had been thinking about the past, the winding river of tradition that had shaped the lives of those who came before him. That night, his thoughts turned toward an era that had shaped his ancestors, the days of the Moonshiners. Moonshiners, Proffitt began aloud, though he knew he was mostly speaking to himself. Now there's a subject that'll stir up all kinds of thoughts. Some folks look at 'em like outlaws, the scourge of the law. But if you ask me, they were more like rebels with a cause, fighting for freedom in the only way they knew how. His voice trailed off as the wind rustled the leaves of the towering oaks around his cabin. The conversation might have ended there, but Proffitt wasn't one to let a good train of thought go to waste. His ponderings usually went deeper, pulling at the fabric of history like a loose thread. With the moon casting silver shadows on the forest floor, he leaned back in his chair and continued. You see, the Moonshiners didn't start out as criminals, he explained, his gravelly voice gaining strength as he grew more passionate. Back in the day, folks around here were just trying to survive. The government, with its taxes and regulations, didn't care about the people in the mountains. The people here had their land, their livestock, and their way of life. But the government wanted a cut of everything, including the grains that people grew. So, they taxed the liquor, what they called whiskey. And the mountain folk didn't take kindly to that. Proffitt paused, took a long drag from his pipe, and flicked the ash into the dirt. The stories of moonshine weren't just tales of outlaw behavior, they were stories of resistance. Proffitt knew that history wasn't always written in the dusty archives of cities, but rather in the smoke-filled cabins and hidden caves of the mountains. The story of moonshine was deeply intertwined with the spirit of independence, a spirit that had long defined the region. The first moonshiners weren't trying to break the law, they were just trying to live. Proffitt continued, his eyes reflecting the glow of the fire burning nearby. The government wanted its taxes, but they didn't understand the people. They didn't know the land, the customs, or the hardships. So the people started to make their own liquor, in secret, sticking it to the man, as some would say. And let me tell you, those folks were clever. They found the perfect spots in the mountains to hide their stills, deep in the hollows where no one could hear them or see them. He leaned forward, his gaze intense, as if he could see the past unfolding before him. That's where the real art came in, he said, tapping his pipe. Making moonshine wasn't just about mixing a few ingredients. It was about knowing the land, understanding the weather, and using the right materials. The best moonshiners didn't just slap a still together, they built it like a work of art, with care, skill, and a little bit of luck. Proffitt's thoughts drifted to the moonshiners he had known in his youth, men and women who were both daring and practical, working with their hands and their wits to outsmart the law. He recalled the old-timers, with their weathered faces and hands hardened by years of labor, who would tell stories of outrunning federal agents and avoiding the traps set by revenuers. They were always a bit mysterious, never fully trusted by outsiders, but respected by those who understood the way of the mountains. Of course, it wasn't always about just making a living. Proffitt added, his voice growing softer. There was pride in it, a certain joy, even. You take something raw, something from the earth, and turn it into something special. It wasn't just moonshine. It was a symbol of independence. It said, we don't need your rules, your taxes, or your fancy city ways. We've got our own ways, and they work just fine. A smile tugged at the corner of Proffitt's lips as he thought about the moonshiners' ingenuity. It wasn't just the craftsmanship of the stills or the process of fermentation that fascinated him. It was the way these folks had made something from nothing, the way they'd lived on their own terms, carving out a life in the rugged terrain of the mountains. But as much as he admired the moonshiners for their defiance, Proffitt couldn't ignore the shadow that always lingered over their legacy. The danger, the lawlessness, and the inevitable clashes with authority. They got their fair share of trouble too, Proffitt said, with a hint of seriousness in his voice. It wasn't all fun and games. The law, once it caught wind of what was going on, came down hard. The revenuers, men from the federal government, had their own ways of dealing with the moonshiners. And let me tell you, it wasn't pretty.